Tonight, many of America's farmers already feeling the pinch are worried about the possibility of more challenges.
This week, President Trump is expected to announce billions of dollars in aid for the nation's farmers. Many are in financial crisis despite harvesting one of the largest crops in history.
When a collapse begins, it never announces itself. It doesn't arrive with alarms, breaking news banners, or political speeches. It slips in quietly through missing shipments, silent contracts, and buyers who stop answering calls. That's exactly what happened to America's wheat industry in 2025. An empire built over generations started falling apart without a single headline warning the world. For decades, American wheat wasn't just a crop, it was a symbol. It powered global food chains, fed nations, and created trade relationships that seemed impossible to break. Countries trusted it, depended on it, built factories and bakeries around it. And then, something shifted. What was once the most reliable supply on Earth suddenly became the biggest question mark in international trade. Tonight, we uncover how the world quietly walked away from American wheat, how a collapse happened right in front of us, without a storm, without an announcement, just the sound of doors closing one by one. The first signs weren't dramatic, they were subtle. A few delayed shipments in late 2024, a few quiet complaints from importers, a handful of canceled orders that no one paid attention to. But for farmers in the Midwest, those small cracks were the beginning of a nightmare. In Kansas, North Dakota, Nebraska, fields that once fed continents suddenly had nowhere for their grain to go. Silos filled faster than expected. Warehouses overflowed. At first, farmers thought it was temporary, a paperwork issue, a seasonal slowdown. But then more contracts disappeared, more shipments were stalled, more warehouses sent out notices. No additional storage available. In parts of the Midwest, the situation became so dire that some farmers made the most painful decision imaginable, destroying their own crops, burning grain they had worked months to grow, watching a year's worth of labor turn into smoke because there was no buyer left to take it. The world's first quiet exit came from a country that had always been loyal, the Philippines. For years, nearly 90% of their wheat supply came from the U.S. It was a relationship built on trust, consistency, and decades of smooth trade. But in May 2025, that trust cracked. A milling company suddenly canceled a 12,000-ton American order. No negotiation, no request for a discount, no warning. They simply walked away. Days later, the same company signed a far bigger deal, 110,000 tons, but not with the United States. Instead, the contract went to Canada and Australia. Why? Not because the U.S. was too expensive. In fact, American wheat was still cheaper by about $8 to $10 per ton. The problem wasn't price, it was reliability. Philippine importers reported that U.S. shipments were becoming unpredictable. Delayed vessels, increased insurance costs, sudden rule changes, political tension, paperwork inconsistencies. Every shipment felt like a risk. Importers wanted stability, and they no longer saw it coming from American ports. When Canada stepped in with steady delivery schedules and clean paperwork, the switch was easy. No headlines, no controversy, just a quiet change in supplier and a massive blow to U.S. agriculture. The shock didn't stop there. Thousands of miles away in the heart of Europe, another shift was happening. This time in France, a country where bread is practically sacred. French bakeries had relied on American hard wheat for generations. It offered the texture, the strength, the consistency needed for baguettes, croissants, pastries. Every corner bakery depended on it. But by mid-2025, American wheat imports to France dropped to their lowest levels in more than 20 years. Mills in cities like Marleix and Rouen began sourcing wheat from Canada instead. Some even returned to locally grown French wheat despite poor harvest conditions. The reason was simple. American shipments had become unreliable. Late arrivals, shipment inconsistencies, and worst of all, U.S. wheat samples sometimes showed chemical residues above European limits. Importers couldn't take the risk. A single shipment held at customs could shut down a mill. And with Washington constantly shifting trade rules, French buyers decided it wasn't worth gambling their entire supply chain. Canada, with its smart farms, automated testing, and transparent delivery schedules, became the preferred choice overnight. Across the Pacific, another pillar fell: South Korea. For nearly 40 years, South Korea depended on American wheat. It was used in everything: ramen noodles, pastries, school lunches, packaged bread. The trade relationship was strong, stable, and free from political drama. But by early 2025, Korean regulators imposed strict limits on glyphosate, a chemical widely used in agriculture. The new limit instantly exposed a problem. American wheat regularly tested between 200 to 400 parts per billion, far above the new threshold. By comparison, Canadian and Australian wheat averaged 30 to 70 parts per billion. The result? U.S. market share collapsed, falling from one-third of Korea's wheat imports to barely 17%. Canada surged ahead, grabbing over 60% of the Korean market. Not because it was cheaper, not because of any political alliance, simply because it met the standards America no longer did. Then came the most painful shift of all: Mexico, a neighbor, a longtime partner. One of the top 3 buyers of American wheat for decades. But by mid-2025, Mexico had reduced U.S. wheat imports by nearly 40%. Canadian imports rose 35%. Argentina stepped in. Even smaller players found opportunities. Mexican importers were frustrated. Too many delays at the border, export form errors, tariff changes that created overnight chaos. One shipment stuck in Texas triggered supply shortages across northern Mexico. Bakeries raised prices, food companies faced losses, importers needed certainty, and they found it in Canada. But perhaps the most symbolic blow came from a place known for its devotion to pasta: Italy. Italy takes wheat seriously, especially durum wheat, the heart of every pasta dish. For years, America held a respectable share of Italy's durum market. But by 2025, the U.S. had fallen so far that it ranked 15th. Canada controlled almost half the market. Italy didn't make a public announcement. No speeches, no policy changes. They simply shifted to suppliers who delivered better quality, better logistics, better consistency. Canadian companies developed new durum varieties tailored specifically for pasta factories. They delivered on time. Their shipments matched the exact specifications promised. Italian producers didn't care about politics. They cared about quality. And the quality that once came from the Midwest now came from Saskatchewan. By the time the world reached mid-2025, the trend was clear. Country after country, longtime allies, loyal buyers, historic partners, were walking away from American wheat. Not loudly, not with protests or sanctions, quietly, softly, just choosing someone more reliable. Meanwhile, back home in the United States, the consequences were devastating. Farmers watched storage bins overflow. Freight companies stood still. Rail lines had nothing to carry. Some fields went unharvested because there weren't enough workers. Many had left the country after new immigration policies forced them out. Others were harvested only to rot in piles, abandoned because buyers had vanished. In Kansas, some silos reported inventory levels more than 40% higher than the previous year. Trains stopped running, ports slowed, communities built around agriculture felt like they were collapsing from the inside. But perhaps the most heartbreaking symbol of this quiet collapse could be seen in a simple loaf of bread halfway across the world. In Manila, when American shipments were delayed, the price of pan de sal, the most common breakfast bread, jumped by 11% in just 3 weeks. People felt the impact directly, and when Canadian wheat arrived, the prices stabilized. No outrage, no headlines. But a message was sent. The Philippines trusted Canada more than the United States. The rest of the world noticed. The collapse of America's wheat empire didn't happen because of one event. It wasn't a drought. It wasn't a war. It wasn't a natural disaster. It was something much more dangerous. It was inconsistency, unpredictability, political interference, bureaucratic delays, rising chemical levels, shipments that no longer arrived when promised. In a world where supply chains depend on precision, the United States stopped being predictable, and global buyers chose to walk away quietly because they no longer needed America the way they once did. The road back won't be simple. It won't be solved by lowering prices or offering discounts. The world has seen cheaper American wheat and still walked away. The return will depend on rebuilding something far more valuable: trust, reliability, transparency, stability, the ability to deliver exactly what the world orders every single time. Because in global trade, the world does not reward the loudest voice. It rewards the most dependable one. And in 2025, that was no longer the United States.